And so, yeah, I'm sorry. I just texted you saying, can I have the link to the Zoom? Because I was confused because in my little media calendar here, it has a link to the Facebook event. And I didn't realize the Zoom was in that. So you can ignore that text message.
No worries at all. Let me just double check one thing and then we can get started. Well, Spike, this is my first time meeting you. I'm the sarcastic Republican.
Hey, it's great to meet you. Yeah, I hear that my followers basically hounded you to have me on, and that's why I'm here. So I appreciate them for doing that, and you for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. That story is quite a ridiculous one. I literally just wanted to create a Facebook page to put out some of my political opinions, and lo and behold, what felt like all of the libertarians in this country decided to flood me with comments. Joe Jorgensen, Spike Cohen ticket. It was such a coordinated effort that I thought it was Russia. I literally thought it was Russia. I'm not even joking. I literally went through at least a dozen or so of these profiles. I'm like, this has to be a bot.
No, it's not. We have that dedicated a following, and it is growing both in size and intensity. That is what Chris Taylor Brown of Trapped experienced when a few weeks back with that whole thing. So we have a really dedicated group of people, and I'm honored to have them supporting me. But no, they're not Russian trolls. They are about 100,000 really, really incredibly dedicated people that are bound and determined to meme us all the way to the White House.
Isn't there a term for that, astroturfing or something?
Well, no, it's not that. It's actually the opposite. It's a completely grassroots thing. We're not managing it. We have zero control over it, honestly. Like I had, so with the Trapped thing, yeah. I woke up one morning and I had a bunch of text messages and Facebook messages and IG messages and Twitter messages and everything else. People going, we got you with Trapped, and we told him you're gonna wreck his life. And I'm like, what's Trapped? And so I had to Google it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that song, Headstrong or whatever. But like that, no. So it's the opposite of AstroTurf. This is a completely grassroots group of like over 100,000 people at this point who are just bound and determined to get me and Joe into the White House and to bring everyone into the movement. So it's like a reverse Borg. But it's actually pretty inspiring. But no, we have no control over it.
Well, whatever it is, I love the passion, and I'm so happy to have you on our first interview. I'm looking forward to this. Man. I spent some time yesterday going through some of your material. You are a hilarious dude. That is what I can say.
That means a lot to me. And I'm listening to you, but the reason I'm looking down is so that I can share this live on my page as well. So.
Oh, sure.
But I am listening. I'm just looking down. So.
Absolutely, no worries. Right. So we have a ton of people who are tuned in or who will eventually watch this video who aren't fully cognizant of what the libertarian platform stands for.
Okay.
So in the interest of shining some light on some of the political ideologies that you and Joe Jorgensen has, I'm going to try to solicit some opinions as they pertain to issues of national importance today in 2020. Okay. I personally think that's the best way to apply any political philosophies to current issues. I think that's the best way for people to think, okay, will this framework work for me today? Mm-hmm. So that sounds good to you?
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it, man.
Perfect. So you seem like an intense guy. So I'm going to start off with a pretty intense question. And I think every American on this planet deserves to know the answer to this question. Okay. I understand that this question is too personal, but our viewers and I would appreciate your transparency on this matter. Yeah, look at that smile.
I'm looking forward to this question.
Yeah, smile. So you once claimed that if you weren't personally able to accomplish all the important things within 100 days, such as giving away free ponies, creating time travel to kill baby Hitler, doing zombie stuff, etc., that you would resign immediately, and you would have yourself replaced with Baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda.
Yeah. My question to you is, and I need you to be honest with me here. I need you to be transparent. Yeah. Where are you hiding Baby Yoda, and how the hell can I get one?
So, I mean, in retrospect, I should have talked with Baby Yoda first. I assumed that he would want the position, and now I'm finding that it's increasingly difficult to actually reach him. So I think he might be getting cold feet. But yeah, no, that was a promise I made, and we'll have to find them. We'll have to find them, and I might need help. So it's good that I have the Joe Spike army on my side, because they will probably be very instrumental in. I see Arizona for Jorgensen has her Baby Yoda and Baby Yoda companion there. So we found them. And so now if, so the first part's taken care of, but first of all, I believe that we will absolutely nail our first 100 days, no problem anyway, but we have that backup now. So thank you for that.
Of course. So as you know, I am the sarcastic Republican.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a Republican who firmly believes more than anything else on this planet, that corporate donors should be allowed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying in Washington, buying out congressmen and women to get their business favorable legislation passed.
Yes.
As a libertarian, do you have an issue with that?
I have an issue with the patronage that's been created by the fact that government has so much power and ability to just print out endless reams of money to hand them in the first place. That's the problem. We often focus on the consequence of the actual problem, and this is no exception to that. The actual problem is that the federal government, through the Federal Reserve, is able to just print out endless reams of money to hand off however they wish. We just saw this with the so-called CARES Act and what's about to happen next with this second round of so-called stimulus. The American people were given roughly $17,000 of debt per American, somewhere between $16,000 and $17,000, not per household, not per taxpayer, per person, per American, including children.
As a result of the CARES Act.
As a result of the CARES Act and the Federal Reserve actions to try to prop up Wall Street. And what they got out of that was they got $1,200 and they watched a bunch of multi-billion-dollar multinational companies not see any harm done to their bottom line in the midst of what would have otherwise been or what has been for most other people, the worst recession in our lifetime. And one that has been caused by a pandemic that was caused because the CDC didn't allow medical professionals to test and treat patients for COVID for nearly 2 months when it first arrived here, because they said that they would create their own test kit, and they had this ridiculous law with this Byzantine approval process for anyone else who wanted to do so. So they basically imposed an epidemic upon us, or at least a much worse epidemic than we would have had if they had simply let medical professionals do their job. And then they used it as an excuse to tell us all to stay home, print out endless trillions of dollars with the Federal Reserve money machine goes brrr machine, and then hand it off to their favorite cronies who bought and paid for them to be in office, handed the rest of us $1,200, told us, most of us, that we weren't essential and that we shouldn't go outside unless we absolutely have to. And if we do go outside or do anything that we're not supposed to do, we'll be put in jail, where we're almost certain to get COVID-19 there. And the threat there is very, very implicit.
Gotcha.
Listen to everything that we say, do what we tell you, or we will make sure you get the virus that we allowed to grow out of control in the first place.
You touched on several things there. Thank you for the comprehensive answer. But quick question. So with respect to the position that you hold right now towards the CARES Act and bailing out businesses, going back to the 2008 financial crisis, what is your opinion on using the money to bail out businesses that have that SIFI categorization, institutions that are considered systematically important to the financial structure of the United States?
Again, we have to look at the problem there. The problem there is that through various legislation, banks and lenders were encouraged to give bad loans, predatory loans that in a free market would largely not exist if those companies had to underwrite them themselves. But because the federal government was underwriting them, sure, I'll do that all day long. If you're underwriting through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, my ability to give out garbage loans, essentially junk loans to people who did not need mortgages, sure, I'll do that all day long. Oh, you will even do it if it's a balloon loan? Great, I'll do those as well. And in fact, it actually reached a point where it was starting to reach that froth level where there was an obvious bubble there, where they started threatening some banks and saying, you're not giving out as many garbage loans as your competitor. We might have to, go after you for discrimination. So banks that were actually saying, this is a little crazy. We're giving out a bunch of terrible loans and there's no way this isn't going to blow up in our faces. They were actually threatened with legal action. So as a result of that, a predatory banking was essentially mandated at the federal level. And lo and behold, it blew up in everyone's face, because it turns out that when you print out endless reams of money to hand them off to people who shouldn't be having loans, and you're literally doing it to try to prop up an economy where the second people start actually losing jobs, the whole thing completely falls apart, which is what happens. Now the government goes, oh my God, look at all these companies that are too big to fail. They are systemic companies, and if we allow these companies to fail, we'll lose everything. I hate to say it, folks, but frankly, we need to give them money. And I know it's not right, but we just have to, because it is what it is. This is what the free market gave us, and we have to bail out the free market, or else we're going to have socialism. And so what really happened there was big businesses were told, give garbage loans out, give predatory loans out, and we will rob those same taxpayers whose lives get ruined as a result of it. We will rob them and their children and their children and their children with interest to make sure that your bottom line isn't affected. And we will tell them that it's because you're too big to fail. Those individuals and those families, they're not too big to fail. They can fail all day long. We're fine with them failing. We're fine with them ending up homeless. We're fine with them ending up relying on welfare. We're fine with their lives and livelihoods being destroyed. We're fine with increases in suicide rates because they just can't take it anymore because they've been robbed of everything. But they, the billionaires, are too big to fail.
Wow, couldn't disagree with most of that. It looks like we're getting a couple questions from participants. I'm gonna have some time at the end of this interview where we crowdsource. For now, I do have a couple more questions on current issues that I would love to know what the libertarian viewpoint is. Like, I have a pretty good understanding of how Republicans think about this, how Democrats think about this, but honest to God, I have no idea how libertarians view this.
Cool.
So, again, I believe, Spike, from the very depth of my heart, that federal agents in unmarked vehicles with unmarked identifications should absolutely be able to approach American citizens and take them. That's a core belief that I have.
Kidnap them, yeah. No,
yeah, that's a core belief that I have. This is what you get when you go against Trump's demands, Trump's wishes. Like, that's my belief. So, as a libertarian, what's your view on that whole practice that's happening in Portland right now and maybe in other cities?
This is actually a key belief of Baby Yoda as well. So here's the thing with this. And again, we're looking at the conclusion. Here's what has happened. This is the logical conclusion of everything that's been happening, starting largely in the 1950s and 60s. This started with federal involvement in policing, which clearly never should have happened. Many conservatives and Republicans and virtually basically all libertarians agree that usually when the federal government gets involved with something, it does not end well. And that we recognize that the 10th Amendment wasn't written as a suggestion. It was very clear that if something wasn't explicitly given as enumerated power of government, then it is best left to the states. Actually, it's legally mandated to be left to the states, or even preferably just the people to decide for themselves. So in the case of policing, in the 1960s, the Supreme Court came up with a ridiculous legal doctrine called qualified immunity, which said that abusive government officials and police could not be sued or held legally liable for infringing upon the rights of the American people, which up until that point they could. They couldn't be held liable if they decided what they did was reasonable. And when I say they, I mean the one who was just accused. Right. That person subjectively decides that what they did was reasonable, then they can't be held liable. Imagine if you could go to court and say, Your Honor, I know that I've been accused of murder and whatever, but I think what I did was perfectly reasonable. And the judge goes, oh, well, then I'll just drop the charges then. That's essentially qualified immunity. We could do an entire episode just on qualified immunity, but that is the core of what it is. It was created by the Supreme Court in order to allow police and government officials to abuse civil rights protesters. It was strengthened over time in response to the war on drugs and then later to the war on terrorism. But it has allowed unaccountable bad police and other government officials like CPS workers and others to openly infringe upon the rights of the American people and not be held accountable as a result of it. And here's a perfect example of what happens with that. Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd, murdered George Floyd. He had 17 other complaints against him before that happened, including wrongful death complaints. He may have murdered other people. And the Minneapolis Police Department, when they looked at Derek Chauvin, they made the same cost-benefit analysis that police departments around this country make when they look at the bad apples in their bunch. They said, this guy is terrible. He sucks. We'd love to get rid of him, but it's going to cost us a fortune going after the police unions to try to get rid of him, and there's no guarantee we'll be able to. And because of qualified immunity, it's not costing us anything to keep him on the payroll. So eventually he'll go too far and get put in prison, and then we can get rid of him. And that incentivizes bad policing. It punishes good policing and holding bad police accountable because nothing happens to them. If you end qualified immunity right off the bat, you flip all that around. Now those exact same police departments, they make that same cost benefit analysis and they go, this guy's going to cost us a fortune, get rid of him. The police unions say, this guy's going to cost us a fortune, get rid of him. The groups, the departments and agencies are going to then work together and try to make sure to filter through so that when cops that are coming in who potentially could be bad cops, that they look for any signs that they could be bad to actively root out cops that are bad. Good policing is incentivized. Bad policing is punished and held accountable like it should be, like any of us would be held accountable if we did something similar. And the rift between the police and the public that they serve can finally begin to heal. There are many other problems as well. There's the military industrial complex applying itself to policing through the military surplus program, where police are getting not just military equipment, but military training. Military contractors are going into our communities and teaching our police how to use military equipment for military applications. And then they fly off with these police now with a bunch of breaching equipment and tanks and drones and grenade launchers going, well, I guess, well, we were just trained to use this, how to use this in a military application. I guess that's what we're doing now. And it changes how everything is working. The war on drugs is a problem. We have criminalized, we have created a new prohibition that, like the original prohibition, has strengthened cartels and gangs in our streets, has made us less safe, has imprisoned millions of people for engaging in victimless commerce. Often they are addicts who were just selling drugs to support their own habit. And instead of treating that like a health problem, which is what it is, we treated it like a criminal problem. We throw them in jail. They come out. They have a federal record. Now their life is that much harder. They're probably still addicted to drugs, and things have been made worse. Now there's recidivism. So we could go on and on with this. The federal police specifically, this is the logical conclusion of the federal government being involved in policing. Because once it reaches a boiling point and the people are on the street saying enough already, no more, the federal government goes, well, we've already been directing this from the beginning. Let's just send our own people out there. And that is what we now have.
You touched on one thing about the process of the criminal justice system. That's a conversation entirely on its own. But
yes, yeah.
If a person were to go through the criminal justice system, they lose their ability to vote and lose their ability to have political representation. What is your view on that? Because I know that a lot of people, they say, hey, like, this is not something that people have a right to take away based on what's in the Constitution. So
right.
Republicans, Democrats, they both have their different views on it. What about as a libertarian? What do you?
There are differing opinions within libertarian communities. The consensus, and I share this consensus, this opinion, is that who better than the victims of the state to be able to decide what the state looks like? I think it is a canard when we go, well, they're going to legalize murder and rape if we let them vote. No, they're not. No, they're not. First of all, the vast majority of people with criminal records are there for victimless crimes in the first place. They weren't there for rape and murder. And you know what? Okay, fine. So then if we make a compromise and say that while they're in prison for rape or murder or what, for an actual crime with a victim, then they can't vote. We set free all the other people who never actually victimized anyone and we let them be able to vote. I think that we will end up with a much better outcome in terms of what our government looks like, because these are people who acutely, more so than pretty much anyone else in this country, know what happens when the government goes too far. They experience it in their day-to-day lives, and there's no reason they shouldn't be able to vote. And like you said, constitutionally, there's no justification for it. They are being disenfranchised, and I would argue that it's being done in an unconstitutional way. I know that there's Supreme Court decisions that say otherwise, but we've seen how the Supreme Court is able to read something that a lot differently than the rest of us read the Constitution. I argue that it is an inherent right in a system that is imposed upon us, where we are told that the only way that we can influence a government that presumes authority over us is through the democratic system, that the idea that we are not able to participate in that system for no other reason than we were put in jail for a victimless crime is an unacceptable infringement upon our rights.
Gotcha. Talking about rights and infringements and government overreach. So by the way, everything that you're saying, like in my little head, I try to allocate, okay, that's a Republican point, that's a Democrat point. I'm trying, I'm trying to create a formula for what equals a libertarian.
Right.
So one thing that I think I've seen,
and you're having some problems with that because we are so outside of the left-right Republican rope-a-dope.
Right. Oh my God,
it's hard to reconcile it. Exactly. Yeah.
It's very. So I'm like doing these little calculations. So one thing that I've seen, I think this is, with respect to masks and COVID-19,
yes,
I think the overall consensus in the libertarian community is that yes, it does prevent, it does reduce the transmission.
It slows
of COVID.
The spread.
It slows the spread. But then one of the points of contention that I've seen, at least, is whether state or federal agencies have a right to tell people that they must do it or not. Can you offer some clarity there?
The federal government does not. It is arguable whether the state governments do, but more importantly, we're seeing that the state trying to tell people what to do hasn't been working. It led to a massive revolt, essentially, of people saying, no, I'm going to go on summer vacation and do whatever I want.
Right.
And it is not working well. And again, every mandate is enforced under the threat of harm. So when we are telling people that you have to wear this mask to protect yourself and others, and if you don't, we will put you in a cage and you will absolutely, almost assuredly get infected. We are sending a message to people that we're basically telling them, do what we say or we'll hurt you. And which is essentially what government does, is just in a very blatant and incredibly frightening way, that this particular way will hurt you with a disease, basically. Here is the way, in my mind, to deal with this mask situation.
Please.
Okay. You don't have a mandate. You simply explain to people the situation. If we're all wearing masks when we are out, then we will be in a much better situation, because we're all essentially, unless we're all wearing N95 masks, really we're just protecting others from the germs that we may be spreading, asymptomatically or symptomatically, sneezing, coughing, or even just breathing and talking close to each other. So we try to stay however many feet apart, 3 to 6 feet apart. We try to keep the masks on. It greatly slows the spread. It does not prevent it entirely, but it slows the spread. We tell businesses this, and then we tell them, hey, listen, you want to tell people to wear it in your business? You don't want to tell people to wear it in your business? That's up to you. If it determines that a super spreader event or an outbreak happened in your home or business, you could be held liable, at least in civil courts. That alone is going to be enough. That, along with the overall social pressure from it, will be enough for the vast majority of businesses to say, hey, listen, we need to, we're going to, you have to wear a mask. We already saw Walmart, Kroger, Target, a few others have already done this. Many other businesses have mandated this for their employees that are in like in warehouses and things like that, like with Amazon. It didn't require a state mandate. It was them looking at the data and going, yeah, this can be a problem for us unless we do something. The meat packing industry has completely revolutionized how they're having their workers interact with meat. And it, for the most part, was not because of state action. It was because they knew that if their freaking meat is swimming with COVID, that's going to come back on them and they're going to have problems. So I think you just make it clear that there's not going to be any indemnification against liability, which is what the federal government often does to its favored cronies. We just stop that and we let the market make its decisions. I think that slows the spread on its own.
Gotcha. I'm starting to see the theme of your party's like slogan, the whole "Don't tread on me" thing. It's just basically saying just don't
tread on anyone, not just me.
Don't tread on. Assuming everybody has that. Okay, makes sense. I want to circle back to the protests and monuments and memorials. So here's what I truly believe, Spike. I am a student of history.
Okay.
And for me, it's very important that we maintain history so that we never forget it. Because if we forget history, it leads to a whole bunch of bad outcomes. So, with respect to Confederate memorials, I genuinely worry that if all these Black Lives Matter protests, if they remove all of these monuments, we'll forget everything about that history. There's no other documentation of this.
There's no other way.
There's no other documentation of Robert E. Lee or any of these other Confederate generals.
It's just the statues.
It's just gone. So I don't know. Like, how do you I understand the history behind it, but yeah, give me a 2 cents.
One of the saddest things in American history is that shortly after the Declaration of Independence was drafted and published for the public to see, many patriots took to the streets and started tearing down statues to King George and other aristocracy, the other British royalty. Sadly, we have no idea who any of those people were because the statues were torn down. I don't know. We know that there was a King George. We don't know who he was. R.I.P. King George. Shout out to the homie Big George. Here's the thing. So there's 2 questions here. One is what's the best government policy to handle this? And the other is, what do I personally think about what's happening with these statues? Government policy, why is the government having large amounts of land that they put statues on and they tax us all to pay for its upkeep? And show me in the Constitution where it says that we're going to have lots of monuments that cost, in some cases, millions of dollars to upkeep at the taxpayer expense. I think the best way to deal with this is you either privatize that land and let whoever owns it do whatever they want with it, or you sell off the statues or give them away or whatever if they want to be in a museum, or someone just wants it in their backyard and they're like, yeah, it's my favorite slave owner, however you want to deal with it. Now it's their personal private property. They can do whatever they want with it. And if anyone tried to take it, then I would be one of the people saying, hey, listen, I don't like that statue, but that's their property. Leave their property alone. It's theirs. And I think that this is an example of forced association. When we are all forced into association together, and we are all forced to pay under threat of harm for these different things, when we have massive disagreements and vast disagreements over the best way to do it, it goes from being a difference of opinion to an actual battle, because whoever wins gets to force their ideology and their belief and their preferred outcome on everyone else at their expense, at the threat of harm. So my opinion specifically with these statues.
Yes.
If I see a Confederate statue, I say, I'm not sure why this needs to be here, but whatever. If the community here thinks it's fine, then fine. I'm also not someone who is able to say that my ancestors were owned, or that people, that were genocided against by those people. So we have statues to people like Columbus and like Robert E. Lee and others who, if you're not white, you have a pretty bad, if you're a native or you're a black person, especially, you look at these people and it would be the equivalent of us having an unironic statue. I'm Jewish, having an unironic statue to Hitler and going, well, you can't take it down because, I mean, yeah, we recognize that largely what Hitler did was bad, but he did some good stuff too. And frankly, if we take it down, that's our history. Like, no, if there were a statue of Hitler up that was owned by the government, again, if some schmuck owns his own statue of Hitler, I'm gonna be like, that guy's a dick. We should all say that he is. And I hope I'm not associating freely with anyone, but if he wants a statue of Hitler, it's his property. But for the government to have it, and for all of us to be taxed, or everyone in that community to be taxed for its upkeep? No, absolutely not. So that's my opinion on that. But I think in terms of government policy, just get government out of it and let people own these things or not own these things or tear them down or whatever else. But stop making everyone pay for the upkeep of statues that many people find a direct insult to their heritage and their identity.
I think another thread that I'm finding in all of your answers, I feel like Republicans and Democrats, they have a lot of like morality tethered to their reasoning.
Yeah.
But for you, at least based on some of the things that you're saying, it's more like, let's leave morality aside. Just let's disintermediate the government from all of these decisions and take it from there.
So I actually see this as a moral issue. I get what you're saying. I think it is give the power back to the people, but I see that as a moral play. Republicans and Democrats in their they're basically their exclusive control of every lever of power in government from the federal, state, and local levels for over 160 years have imposed bad, centrally planned, arbitrarily defined, and crony-friendly policies that directly harm all of us on a daily basis in ways both large and small, especially the most marginalized among us. And we are at such a point where it is so normal at this point that we simply accept it as the reality of our existence instead of recognizing that these are artificial, man-made systems that can be dismantled. They can be dismantled without a single shot being fired. They can be dismantled by simply putting people in office who say, no, this is not how we want things to be. We want to take the power out of the hands of the craven, lying, pandering politicians, their well-heeled crony billionaires, and the bureaucratic state that they've created, and put it back in the hands of the people and their communities where it always belonged. In my mind, that is the ultimate moral tale. But yes, I guess another way to say it is that taking it out of whether it's right and wrong and just simply saying, give it to the people and let them decide. And then that way, if there's a disagreement, when you take the authoritarianism out of it, when you take the coerciveness of the state and government out of it and simply put it in the hands of the people, now it's just a disagreement. It's just a disagreement in opinion. We're not forcing things on each other. It's just me having my opinion and you having your opinion, and we can associate or not associate it as we see fit.
Gotcha. Well, it looks like we're running up on time. So I have two more questions that I want to do before we dive into some of the participants' questions.
Cool.
First is, Mr. Cohen, assuming that you and Joe Jorgensen win the presidency, and in this hypothetical question, say you were awarded a new bungalow in a remote area.
Yes.
Okay. They just created the bungalow, but there's no way to get to the bungalow. So my question is, how would you get to the bungalow And who will pay for the roads that you would have to make to get to that bungalow?
Who will build the roads?
Who will build the roads for you and your president to get to your bungalow?
How on earth are we going to have roads if we don't make everyone pay taxes? So I have some fantastic news for everyone.
Okay.
There were roads before there was a modern system of taxation. And the way it worked was that we all need to get around. We all recognize that. And so people would get together and we would say, and now there were roads with taxes during this time as well. I'm not saying that it was just a completely free market system. But in much of the American frontier, for example, a road was created because the people would get together and go, yeah, this would be a great area for a common road. And the businesses especially will benefit from us being able to physically go there. And the rest of us will as well. Here's the cost for it to be built. Here's the cost for its upkeep. And often the businesses paid all or most of the cost because they didn't just have an interest of getting from place to place. They had an interest in making money to be able to do it. Now we flip that around. Now big businesses, Walmarts, Kroger's, Targets, and other businesses, they externalize the cost of getting people to them by just putting it on the taxpayers. The very consumers who then pay for their products and services, they're the ones having to pay every day when they're buying things in sales taxes and in property taxes on their homes, which means that ultimately you don't own your property because if at any point you stop paying that rent, that property tax, they come and take it from you eventually. But so they're having to pay for it, and then they pay again by showing up and buying the services. Again, common theme here. The government under Republicrats is built to serve well-heeled cronies in order to externalize their costs to us, make us pay for it, and then make us patronize them and make us pay for the whole thing and take the power out of our hands in the process. So in the case of this, if I had a bungalow in the middle of nowhere, my vice presidential a bungalow on a a deserted patch of land somewhere or previously undiscovered patch of land, I would want to find the owners of the properties in those areas and try to figure out a way that we could all benefit from there being a road. Now, you'll notice here that there's a little bit of an impossibility. The impossibility is that there were already people there who didn't decide to have a road. So if it's truly just out in the middle of nowhere and there's no one else around it who would have a common interest in us being able to get around, then that falls on me. I can either pay the owner or owners of the land up until, from point A to point B to be able to build that road in their area, or I build an airport if it's really that remote, or whatever. But that's on me because no one else is benefiting from it. So that's the answer to that.
Gotcha. I was hoping you would address the question directly, which you did. Thank you for that.
And also a side note is where we're going, we don't need roads.
I have one more formal question for you.
Okay.
And finally, Spike, if you had to choose between Trump or Biden as president, who would you vote for, and why is your answer neither?
Death. If I had to choose between Biden and Trump, I would say, do I have to die? Like what is my other, because what you are asking me is, do I want to choose between the lifelong crony who has used the power of government in terms of bankruptcy courts and eminent domain and other things to harm everyone around him to his direct benefit, and who promised that he was going to drain the swamp and instead became the king of the swamp creatures, said he'd reduce government and instead has grown it to record levels and with no end in sight, and he's not even pretending anymore like he's not going to, or Joe Biden, a man who has been emblematic and the architect of every bad policy to come out of government for the last nearly 60 years, the war on drugs, the military industrial complex, the endless wars overseas, the various barriers and burden that have been placed on us on the federal level, militarized police state, the everything else. He's been the architect of those things when he's not busy sniffing children and making them uncomfortable in front of their families. This is a terrible choice. My choice, obviously, is Jo Jorgensen, a brilliant self-made entrepreneur, a woman who's ready to lead from day one, a brilliant orator who's able to demonstrate on a case-by-case basis just how the Republicans and Democrats have put us in the mess that we are in and how common sense libertarian solutions are the way out of that mess.
Gotcha. And it looks like, I don't know, so one of the debates that I get into with my brother often, a lot of people don't believe that I have a libertarian brother, but I do. And I discuss this with him a lot. It's regarding all these policies that libertarians hold. And I actually agree with them with the caveat that a free market should exist already. But I feel like our American capitalistic society is so stacked with the crony capitalism that you alluded to multiple times, that
Right.
if you were to implement these principles when such a stacked economy exists, it's not really going to work. And I think you have to first dismantle all of this crony capitalism. And without
Yep.
doing that, implementing the policies won't really work. Do you have
We agree. So for example,
okay.
we want an end to the welfare state, but we don't do that by cutting people off of welfare. Government has gone to the poor and marginalized, beaten the crap out of them, taken everything from them, and then hands them back little scraps of their own bread and uses some of their money they stole to buy them a crutch and says, "Hey, without me, you wouldn't have those crumbs of bread and you wouldn't have a crutch." It's a cynical lie that they've done to them. Now imagine if we show up and go, "Oh my gosh, you poor thing, look what government has done to you. We'll stop this," and we take their crumbs and their crutch and walk away. That's not going to fix it. It's going to cause harm. It's going to make them hate us, and it's not going to fix the actual problem, which is the harm that has been done. So the way that you deal with, for example, the welfare state is you
Right.
get rid of the barriers and the burdens, the crony capitalism, as you put it. Or let's actually go back even a little bit further. There are two forms of capitalism. There is what the Marxists originally termed as capitalism, which is the system we have now, which is why when people tell me, we're in capitalism, I don't feel a need to disagree with them, because according to the Marxists, we are in capitalism. And then there's the free market capitalism that we as libertarians and some conservatives and Republicans and anarcho-capitalists and so forth believe in, which is just a system where the market is completely free, where coercive actors have been removed, and where we are able to freely associate with one another. That's what we call free market capitalism. We want to move away from the state capitalism, the crony capitalism, remove those barriers and burdens to a free market capitalism. I went to housing projects and knocked on doors. Every single person I talked to there had a side hustle, some kind of business they did on the side. Okay. These were not lazy welfare bums. Every single one of them, people in their 70s, had businesses, little things they were doing on the side.
Right.
Everything from mowing lawns, cutting hair, food service, DJing, whatever, all sorts of different things that they did, braiding hair, makeup, tailoring clothes. I mean, all sorts of different things, repairing cars, all sorts of stuff. None of them had licenses because they couldn't afford them. We tell people in this country to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What we don't tell them is that the bootstrap license is like $100,000. So they can't do it. You remove that license from the bootstrap license. You remove those barriers and burdens so that these people are able to grow their businesses into something that they don't worry that the police are going to come and take all of it from them with civil asset forfeiture. And you instead allow them to simply grow their businesses like other previously marginalized communities in this country were able to do, so that they were no longer marginalized because they built themselves up economically and financially. They built their communities up. We allow them to do that. There's not going to be welfare because they won't need to be on it in the first place. No one wants to be in substandard housing. No one wants to live on food stamps. They want to build something. They want to be able to grow themselves and their communities up so that they can live independently. We allow them to do that, and there's no more need for that. And that's true across the board. Healthcare, education, any of the things that we're talking about. You get the cronies out of it. You get government out of it. You remove the red tape. You don't stop helping people in the meantime. You don't get rid of the safety net. You just put the ladders back so they can get out of it.
Wow. Couldn't agree more. Well, that's actually, would you mind taking 30 seconds to, if you had to pitch libertarianism to a Democrat in 30 seconds, and same thing to a Republican in 30 seconds, would you mind like telling me what that pitch would look like? Because I know that a lot of people on both sides of that aisle aren't really happy with the presidential candidates that they have. That is the truth. Like people like Biden was Biden was nobody's first choice. Biden was everybody's safest choice.
If that, yeah.
And with Trump, like, did anybody contest the primaries with him? I don't even remember. I feel like there was one person and he dropped out. But so yeah, people aren't happy. There's no choice. So if you had to communicate a message in 30 seconds to a Democrat and to a Republican, let me know what that is. Starting with the Democrat.
My message to them is largely the same. The system has left you completely behind because it wasn't designed for you. It was designed against you. It was designed by very powerful, cynical people in order to keep you in a position of relying on them and the politicians that they put in place for your basic survival. They want you to be desperate. They want you to be anxious. They want you to have no hope because it is easier to control someone who is not able to provide for themselves. And this system has been created by Republicans and Democrats working hand in hand for over 160 years. And for marginalized communities, it's been going on even longer than that. For some people, it's been going on for over 400 years. But the bottom line is that for a century plus or even more, you have had everything taken from you as a direct result of very powerful, cynical people wanting to take the power and the wealth from you so that they can control you. We as libertarians believe that you own yourself, you own your life, you own your body, you own your labor, and you own the product of your labor, which is your property. This entire system is built around taking that from you. And that is why it leads to the harmful and abusive and inequitable outcomes that we have come to know and love from the Republicrats. The only way moving forward to not throw your vote away is to vote for Joe Jorgensen and myself and the entire libertarian slate, because we have common sense policies that are put in place to end these oppressive and tyrannical and infringing systems, to put the power and the wealth back in your hands so that you can thrive and grow in ways that are simply impossible for the vast majority of Americans right now.
Got it. And the message you would communicate to Republicans?
Same thing.
Same exact thing.
Literally the exact same thing. And
Gotcha.
if they were, I would largely reflect back what they were asking me. So if they were asking me about immigration, I would tailor it to that. If they were asking me about healthcare, I'd tailor it to that. But the elevator pitch is the same. We are all dealing with the same concerns. We are not Republicans and Democrats. We are human beings who have valid concerns and anxieties and fears and hopes and dreams. And I refuse to keep talking to people like they're in some kind of subgroup, because they're not. They may be experiencing things differently based on their intrinsic identity, and we want to change that so that people are being treated equally. But we are all human beings. And I refuse to look at someone as a Democrat or as a Republican, because they're not. They're libertarians and don't know it yet. But really, more importantly, they're human beings who have valid concerns and anxieties and fears. And I refuse to allow authoritarian politicians to continue to blow smoke and pander to them and harm them in such a cynical and craven way.
Gotcha. I was gonna like end with a question about wasting a vote, but I think I've come to terms with the number of memes that libertarians have been sending me. It's like it's a pie chart. They keep sending this pie chart. It's like, here are the people who voted for Hillary. Here are the people who voted for Trump. Here's a little sliver of people who voted for libertarianism. Here's the big sliver of people who didn't vote at all. Why are you criticizing us?
Yeah, more importantly, a vote thrown away is a vote for the people who created the mess, who every 4 years show up to tell you that they'll fix it this time if you vote for them one more time.
Yeah.
I know I created this mess and I keep making it worse, but this is the most important election of our lives, and I've made it that because of all of my terrible policies. But if you vote for me one more time, I'm going to fix this. That's a vote thrown away. A vote for a libertarian is finally a vote that isn't thrown away.
Okay, awesome. So next, what I want to do is spend a few minutes. So everyone in the comments, if you have a question for Spike, throw it into the Zoom group chat right now. And Spike, I want you to pick one or two that you want to answer.
Sure.
From this. Also, I saw a question saying, "What is a Aleppo?" I actually know what that is. I was on your site or somewhere. It was a half hippo, half leopard.
Yeah, it's a hybrid between a leopard and a hippo. It's known for its magic and dexterity. Let's
folks start asking away questions.
Please explain healthcare plans. Okay, perfect. So federal government again gets involved in stuff, makes it worse. At one point in our country, the cost of living when it came to healthcare, the cost of healthcare went up and down with the general cost of living. It didn't skyrocket out of control like it is now. So people ask, well, why is it? Well, that's a fantastic question. During World War II, FDR proposed wage caps in order to keep the cost of the war effort down. At that point, the federal government was employing almost everyone. And so in order to try to keep costs down, they wanted to have wage caps. The threat of those wage caps led employers to start capping the wages on their own and finding ways around the wages to reimburse to compensate their employees. One of those things was comprehensive health insurance. Up until then, health insurance was a catastrophic thing. You would pay a small amount like a pittance every month if you wanted to, and if something terrible happened, like a chronic illness or some kind of terrible accident or whatever, your healthcare would be taken care of in order to get you back to whole. But this idea that you had comprehensive care that paid for every single medical bill did not exist prior to the imposition of an artificial barrier on the market in the form of wage caps that led to the creation of comprehensive healthcare. This was not a market-derived thing. We did not want it. Healthcare insurance, by its very nature, by adding a separation between the consumer and the person paying, and by adding more bureaucracy, which leads to increased cost to compliance and to provision of service, led the cost of healthcare to start going up faster than the cost of the general cost of living increases. That led to about 20 years later with the creation of the Medicaid and Medicare, so to give free healthcare to the poor and the elderly. That led to the creation of two other massive bureaucracies that added even more red tape to the system, which led to the cost of healthcare continuing to skyrocket even more. And then there were many other things like Medicare Part D and other plans that just continued to add to that increase in the rate of increase, until finally the ACA just blew a massive hole in it, so that now across the board, there is just an ever-growing federal register of regulations and burdens that have made it so difficult to provide healthcare services that an increasing number of doctors are either going out of business or just folding up and joining some massive health management firm. You know, a well-connected billionaire crony who bought and paid for Republicans and Democrats to be in office. Gee, I wonder how this system benefited them. So here's what it comes down to. Something like 75% of the cost of healthcare is just the cost of complying with the mandates and taxes and other regulatory burdens and barriers that are in Medicare, Medicaid, and government mandated insurance. That is it. Just that. That's before we get into patent protections for drugs that have been around longer than most of us have been alive, like insulin and epinephrine, things that in other countries are generics that are bought and sold for pennies. That costs pennies to make, but companies, big pharma companies here, can charge 100 or 1,000 times what their general market value is, because they know that our insurance and Medicare and Medicaid have to pay for it. And if you're not covered, you just die of something that's easily treatable with a drug that should cost pennies. Gee, I wonder how this happened to benefit big pharma. You get rid of those protections. And that's before we could get into certificate of need laws. We could get into laws that require doctors to charge everyone the same thing. So if you're a doctor, someone comes in and says, "Doc, I need help, but I can't afford it," you're not allowed to give them the service for free or for less. You have to charge them the same thing you charge everyone else. Getting rid of all of these barriers, burdens, taxes, mandates, things that were designed to protect and grow the market share of well-heeled billionaire cronies, and instead putting the power and the wealth back in the hands of consumers of medical services, all of us, and our providers where it always belonged, will lead to removing the vast majority of the cost burden by getting rid of the mandates, getting rid of the protections for cronies, and putting it back in the hands of you and the providers where it always belonged in the first place.
Awesome answer. Yeah. Oh my God. Looks like we there's so many questions. So Spike, I do want to be respectful of your time. I know we're a little bit over the time limit, but if you want to answer maybe
more questions. Can the CNN boys escort Mama Joe to the debate stage? I probably shouldn't answer that. So someone just to clear, Aleppo is a city in Syria. We know that. Your thoughts on Black Lives Matter? This is a fantastic question. We cannot say that all lives matter as anything other than an angry retort to Black Lives Matter until we have demonstrated that Black lives matter in the eyes of government. And we know disproportionately that Black people and other marginalized communities, but Black people are the single largest marginalized community, that these communities are suffering at disproportionately higher rates than the general population. Black Lives Matter does not mean that white lives don't matter. Black Lives Matter does not mean that all lives don't matter. Black Lives Matter does not mean that only Black lives matter. Black Lives Matter means that we are demonstrating in this time that we recognize that Black people and other marginalized communities are suffering disproportionate harm, with the idea being that we end that harm so that all of us are doing better, especially those who are suffering the worst right now. It does not mean that white people don't also have a hard time. It does not mean that it is impossible for Black people to do okay. It means that statistically speaking, multiple studies have shown that the Black community writ large is suffering disproportionately higher bad outcomes at the hands of the law, and that we can change that by dismantling these systems. Here is a breakdown of the racial discourse in this country. Imagine if you and I go to lunch and we're having a great time having lunch, and someone comes in and hits me with a baseball bat and shoots you a bunch of times in the chest. Okay, I go to the hospital for weeks. I'm in and out of consciousness. I have a severe concussion. I have bleeding on the brain, but I survive. I have some neurological damage that I'll probably always have for the rest of my life, but I am okay. You are in the hospital for a couple months. You die on the operating room multiple times. You have to have multiple surgeries. You have difficulty breathing. You have organ damage. You are never going to be the same again. You are alive and you did make it, but you had a really bad time being shot many times, and will always suffer from that in a really bad way. So several months later, we get back together to commiserate over what happened. And I go, man, I'm just glad we're okay. That was terrible what happened to us, but I'm just glad that the two of us are okay now. And you go, well, I'm not really okay, but I am glad that we're both here. And I obviously got it worse than you, but I'm just glad that we're both here and we're okay. And I'm sorry what happened to you. And I go, whoa. You're saying that you got it worse than me, but I was in the hospital, man. Like I had bleeding on the brain. I had a concussion. I still have some dizziness, neurological problems. I got it pretty bad too. And you go, whoa, wait a second. Of course I got it worse. I nearly died multiple times. They didn't think I was going to live. I have difficulty breathing. I can barely stand and walk around. I'm having a really bad time. If anything, you benefited from the fact that you only got hit with a baseball bat and I'm the one that got shot. And I go, well, maybe if you'd been nice to the guy, he would have only hit you with a baseball bat. That is the political racial discourse in this country. Imagine instead if when you said, I got it worse than you, I say, yeah, you got it worse than me. Now let's go find that guy and do something about it, so that both of us can have the justice we deserve, and that no one else gets hit with baseball bats or shot. That is the racial discourse in this country. Groups of different people who are, as individuals and groups, harmed to varying degrees, arguing over who's benefiting and who's not benefiting. Almost none of us are benefiting. If you are not a well-heeled political multimillionaire or billionaire or one of their bought and paid for politicians, you are more than likely not benefiting from this system. If instead we simply acknowledge that there are groups of people that are getting it disproportionately worse than other, and just validate them. Just say, yes, you have it worse than I do, statistically speaking, and let's fix that so that none of us have it bad anymore. Then we can actually fix this problem and lead to a day where all of us can hold hands and say that all lives indeed do matter. I was just at a Black Lives Matter protest on Saturday in Columbus, Ohio. And I went there and I was asked if I wanted to speak. And I said, no, I think the people who are speaking have a better idea of what they want to say, of what this community needs to hear than me. I'm here to listen to you. And so I listened to some of the organizers of that protest, and I heard what their concerns were, and I heard what they wanted: more police accountability, ending the war on drugs, ending the systemic programs and policies that are in place that make it so hard for marginalized communities, particularly communities of color, to not be able to thrive. And I heard what they said. I validated their concerns. I reflected back that I had heard what they had to say. And then I said, I have fantastic news for you. Joe Jorgensen and I propose ending all of those things you were just talking about. And here's what we want to replace it with. And on that, they endorsed us on the spot. A Black Lives Matter group endorsed Joe Jorgensen and myself and the entire Libertarian Party based on a roughly half-hour-long discussion. Now, this isn't about me, and it's not about the party. This isn't about us winning. This is about demonstrating to a group that there was actually people who cared about them. Imagine if we all did that. Imagine if we went to their spaces and agreed with their concerns using their nomenclature instead of trying to tell them how it should really be said or how it should really be done. And we went to where they were and listened to what they had to say and reflected back that we cared and that we have solutions that we can all work together on that will actually fix it. Imagine how much better of a position we would be in right now. That's my position on Black Lives Matter.
Wow, thanks for that comprehensive answer. In the time that you answered, we got another dozen and a half questions. You can skim through it and pick one more if you want. It's up to you. People are very answer the questions.
Yeah. I wish I had this. I actually my show starts in a few minutes, so I can do one more question. And I encourage you to. So I'm actually probably going to end up doing an AMA. I do AMAs on a regular basis, both on Muddy Waters Media and on my Spike Cohen page on Facebook. So I invite y'all to go there and on YouTube as well. Let's see. Here's a good. What's one to end on? What do you think your odds are of winning? I think that if we get Joe Jorgensen on that debate stage, it's all over. we're going to win that, because right now people are being told, there's third parties, but they're kind of a waste of your vote. They're never going to win. There will be an emperor has no clothes moment when Joe Jorgensen is put between two men who can barely form a coherent sentence between them, and who, just as possibly even more importantly, are emblematic and are and representative of every bad thing to come out of government for the past several decades, both personally and in terms of their party and what they represent. And in between them, you'll have a absolutely brilliant self-made woman who's able to break down how they, both individually and their parties and what they represent, created these problems, and how our common sense libertarian solutions are the way out of that. I think that the people will see in a very clear and demonstrable way that not only is she not a vote thrown away, she's the only viable choice up there. So I believe if we get Joe and me in the debates, I believe that we win it. I believe if we don't get in the debates, we still have a chance. But our biggest thing right now is to get us in that debates. If we can get that 15% in the opinion polls to be able to qualify for those debates, I believe that it's our election to lose at that point.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, looks like you have to hop off. Spike, thank you so much for doing this little Q&A with me.
Absolutely, man.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you having me on. And folks, if you like what you heard, I encourage you to go to Joe20, that's JO20.com. You can fill out our volunteer form. We'd love to have you have you join our team. If you're able to make a contribution, we would appreciate any donation you can make. You can follow me on social media. I am at Real Spike Cohen on Twitter. I am Spike Cohen on Facebook. I'm Spike Cohen on everything. I'm even on TikTok for the kids if you want to have your kids follow this insanity. And you can follow me all over social media. Joe Jorgensen is also everywhere on social media as well, on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and everything else, just like me. And again, our website is Joe20, JO20.com. And I do greatly appreciate your time and the time of all your guests. I wish I had the endless time to answer all these questions, but I do encourage you. Hey, you can inbox them to me. Go to my Facebook and ask me, and I will get to them when I'm able to answer them as well if I didn't answer your question. And I appreciate your time. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Spike.
Bye, everybody.
All right, folks. See ya. Thank you so much for joining the interview. Some people on here were commenting that they were expecting a debate. For the record, I would have completely been thrashed in a debate against Spike Cohen. I've seen his interviews, so that would not have ended well for me. This was just an interview for me, just to get a sense of Spike's policies. He's awesome. Oh my God, he's awesome. Wow, he's an awesome guy. Anyways, folks, I'm about to end this stream. The video is going to be on Facebook as well. And thank you guys for joining. I will talk to you guys in my not sarcastic, but totally sarcastic posts in the future. See you guys.